All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, how to make software releases flow smoothly. Just to let everyone know a few things up top. One, we are recording this. If you need to leave early or you have a colleague who is unable to join, you will be able to view this later. Two, you are able to ask questions as we go. We should have some time at the end for a Q&A session. So as soon as you think of one, even if you think maybe we'll get to it later, please go right ahead and put it in the question panel. It's always good to know what people are asking and thinking. On top of that, at the very end, when I close this out, a very short survey will come up just asking what you thought and what you'd like to learn more about in the future. I don't want to take up too much more time, so Gabe, can we go to the next slide, please? So I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We're going to be getting an overview from Gabe Martinez, a Senior Product Marketing Manager for CloudBees Flow. We'll be seeing a demo from Sunil Mavadia, the Director of Global Solutions Architecture. But for now, I'd like to introduce our first presenter to get us started, Jim Schultz, founder and president of the North American DevOps Group, or NADOG. Jim.
Hey, Max, thank you very much for the intro. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in, and thanks to the CloudBees Flow team for inviting me to participate in this webinar. If we can flip to the first slide there, Max. I just have a couple of slides just to intro everybody to the webinar here today. And for those of you who don't know me or my story, I've been in this space for about 15 years, well before it was even called DevOps, right? We're all trying to figure out how to automate builds. And during that time, I really came to understand, watching the DevOps space grow and mature, really came to understand that the biggest challenge for most companies going through a DevOps transformation has really been culture and sharing. And that was really the idea behind forming North American DevOps Group. That was about 4.5 years ago, was really to give people a neutral place, a watering hole, if you will, a place to gather, share ideas and war stories, and to create bonds with peers that are outside of their own walls. Today, NADOG is in 25 cities in North America, 10 cities in Europe. We have dozens of corporate sponsors and thousands of members. And really the success of NADOG, I would very much relate to the fact that we offer a sense of belonging. We encourage every voice to be heard. We strive to create an environment that's open to change. And shameless plug up there, you can see the link on top. If you'd like to join NADOG, it's totally free to join. It's free for practitioners and IT leaders to attend the events as well. Next slide, please, Max. So it's really been much the same in the software delivery space, right? So we've gotten very good at CI. I remember the days when, 15 years ago, people were doing weekly builds on a Friday night. They're managed by a Word doc or a spreadsheet. They're manually entered. And that was really where things like BuildForge back in the day, and then Hudson, that eventually became Jenkins, came into play. So we've gotten really good at that piece. And a lot of us are well down the path of CD, right? We're deploying to test, we're deploying to staging, and a lot of us are even deploying all the way to production with every new check-in. But what's been lacking in the CI/CD space for many organizations is that environment or that platform that fosters true collaboration, governance, and developer freedom. And to answer this is really what CloudBees is trying to do, right? CloudBees is introducing the concept of software delivery management, or SDM. And without stealing all of their thunder, I'm going to let the CloudBees Flow team take it from here, talk to you about SDM and application release orchestration. But I want to thank CloudBees again for inviting me to participate in this webinar, and also to thank everyone for joining. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Gabe with CloudBees.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone that is on the call both live and those listening in on demand after the fact as well. So I guess to start off, when we look at this, why does what we do matter, right? And I think this is a quote that a lot of us have seen many times in many different areas and many different presentations, but we modified it. Well, it's because software runs the world, right? It's no longer eating the world anymore. It actually is the world that we live in at this point. The original phrase was put together and was coined back in 2011 by a well-known venture capitalist by the name of Mark Andreessen, who, if you know, co-authored the Mosaic web browser, which eventually became Netscape. So very, very forward-thinking individual in that he believed, and still believes to this day, that where you differentiate where you innovate, and where you make your money is quite simply software. In other words, software essentially is the fastest path to revenue for companies. Now, if you take a look at how this entire thing bears out in market capitalization, take a look back in 2001, right? On this screen, the folks that were making all the money, they were doing it because they had lots of inventory, right? They already had lots of money, or they had things like gas, oil, things of that nature. And you see this repeated over and over, right? More gas, more oil. Microsoft and Apple, of course, here being the exceptions. But I think we can all agree that that's no longer the case, because today's world, software companies are the biggest, right? They're the ones that are really dominating the space. And after that 2011 proclamation by Marc Andreessen about software eating the world, you notice that in 2016 right here, the top capitalized companies from a market capitalization standpoint, they're all software companies. And the reason being, it's much easier to innovate and create value today in software because you no longer have to worry about doing things like drilling holes in the earth, right, to make money. Companies can just easily come up with great ideas and simply ship them to people, right? And in that video you saw as well, you take a look over the last 2 decades plus, right? You notice that the growth that took place between Apple, Microsoft, the top 5 there was just, it's staggering. But shipping software is not always easy, is it? People are always looking for ways to make it better, and that's really how this whole concept of DevOps fits in. And people are really making these significant bets on DevOps to be able to keep themselves, their business, their livelihoods really relevant. They don't want to get outmaneuvered by an upstart competitor. So take a company like Citibank, for example, or any financial institution for that matter, that have lots of different smaller companies nipping at their heels, competing in a very, very competitive space like e-banking. You have fintech companies like Simple, for instance, or maybe Robinhood that don't have a storefront like Citibank. They're all 100% online. So, companies like Citibank and the like have to be able to place their bets on DevOps to make sure that they, again, are being able to stay relevant with the rest of the market. So in order to capture these markets in this software economy that we live in, you can't wait for someone to just simply drill the well for you, right? You have to be able to figure out how to release pieces of software, value to your customers, different things that delight them more and more frequently, right? And this is why developers, they love playing around with all these different new technologies and thinking to themselves, I can make this better with Kubernetes. I can improve this with a serverless architecture or some other library that I want to be able to tie in. But the thing is, operations teams, on the other hand, they're not playing around with the technology and software the same way, or maybe even at all, that the developers are, and seeing how this stuff works. Maybe to put it in a different light, if anyone on the call is a Game of Thrones fan, when you took a look at the Bolton army coming at Jon Snow, right? If they all lined up in a straight line, all had the same weapons and all came at a steady pace, you probably would have a much better chance of keeping up with him. And ops teams are essentially facing that same sort of issue, right? It's like a conveyor belt, right? If it's slow and it's steady, you're easy to pick things off easily, place them in where the bucket that they go, and move along. But when that conveyor belt starts to speed up, and the pieces that are on that conveyor belt are different, and it becomes much more difficult. So what we're seeing is that people are not only upgrading their software, they're upgrading all of the different stacks around the software. And ops teams are having a difficult time keeping up with this evolution, both from a frequency of code being updated, as well as all the trappings and trimmings around this code. And this is causing what we have deemed release anxiety, right? So how does this all tie in to what we do within CloudBees Flow and within all of this collectively? Well, I think a level set is probably appropriate because to us, the definitions might be a little bit different. To us, environment management involves provisioning, assignment, inventory of both on-premise and dynamic cloud resources easily and without conflict. From a pipeline and environment management standpoint, this involves the creation and the sharing of standard, governed, observable software release processes. And the two key components that make up Flow are really between release orchestration and deployment automation. Now, to us, release orchestration involves defining releases and their relationships, as well as the documenting, the automating, coordinating, tracking, orchestrating everything, right? both human and machine activities for approvals and tasks. From a deployment automation standpoint, the way that we view this in the CloudBees Flow, from a CloudBees Flow standpoint, it involves the packaging of these application binaries and the configuration and automating the delivery of that content so that it can be installed in multiple different environments along the pipeline as a part of this collective release. And you can see visually how this all fits together in one collective view from development all the way through production here. So when we think about these different releases, the way that we view them, when you have one team with one app and you're releasing it into one specific environment, it tends to be pretty easy to connect all the dots. There's not a lot of elements that are going to throw you sideways, right? Even if it's going into something like Kubernetes that you see here on the screen. So this is sort of that utopian world where we have a very easy path to be able to take a look at. But as you know, the world's not really like that, right? This is what the world really looks like. And it becomes a lot more difficult when you have multiple different streams. So the question begs, how do you manage and orchestrate this cacophony of stuff in a way that's governed, in a way that's transparent, and in a way that's audible, right? This is the problem that CloudBees Flow solved and is focused on in helping people not only address, but solve as well. Which leads us to this concept of application release orchestration, or ARO. So ARO it's essentially a new way, more or less, to approach. It's a new approach to release automation that puts an emphasis on organizational and tool chain agility. And this allows teams to easily adapt and take advantage of new technologies that are introduced, different situations. And not only that, but in a predictable and secure way as well. So as we think about why it is that we need ARO, or why do we need a blueprint for this, my colleague Sunil, why is that? Why is it that this is such a huge thing for companies to think about now when it comes to placing their bets not only on DevOps but just application release orchestration in general?
It's a good question, Gabe. Thank you. We find today that a lot of companies are going through some sort of a transformation, right? Some start off with an agile transformation. Many are going through a DevOps transformation. You hear the term digital transformation today. Sometimes it's one of those transformations or a combination of all three. What they're trying to do is get software to market in a more timely fashion. The problem is that when they start off with an agile transformation, for example, the work items coming out of their agile transformation are much faster than how the DevOps transformation, or the technology side of the transformation, is able to receive that and push their code out to production, right? And so there's a total mismatch. It's that typical people, process, tools triangle, where you try to connect every single aspect of functions within an organization, the technologies that they address, and the processes that the entire enterprise is trying to ingrain, right? But when what you have is disparate systems, disparate tools, no collaboration between teams, and this is a prime example. If you look at the screen right now and you're watching that, it says more time testing, deploying, releasing software. That's a given, right? You want to be able to do that, but when you are taking code from one team to another, there's a lag in time, there's a lag in response. So the automation either is minimal or doesn't exist at all, right? When code goes to production, the resulting incidents, of failure or downtime, and the feedback loop is almost non-existent in many cases, right? And so you want to close that loop and figure out where the inefficiencies are, of course. Then, and at the end of the day, that alignment between development operations is crucial. That's why it's called DevOps, right? And it's a typical cultural change that needs to occur. How do you actually get that initiated, right? So that's the crux of this.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. Now, when we think about, how do folks start to implement, or how does it apply to their businesses specifically? Where, in your mind, does ARO really come in for a lot of organizations when they start to formulate this?
Good point. So ARO, first of all, application release orchestration is a term that was coined by Gartner and Forrester, right? So I'm not sure which one came first, but it is an industry term, right? In other words, what they've said is that you need three things to have a software delivery pipeline, an effective software delivery pipeline, right? And a software delivery management scheme, and that is release orchestration, deployment automation, and then pipeline and environment management, right? And so to make all those things effective, you need to develop a tool chain strategy that, one, allows you to take your existing tools, plug them in to your pipeline, right? Allows you to provide some decision making in your process, right? And that basically means that all those different teams, those functions, and their roles, which now start to overlap, in the entire process cycle, are now talking the same language. They're talking the same process. They're using the same tools and providing that feedback. And when I say tools, for example, a lot of teams today use Jira, but you might have a different set of teams that use a different Agile tool, maybe CA's Agile Central, right? But plugging those two teams into the same pipeline and providing the same level of visibility is very crucial, right? On the flip side, you might have test teams that use different test frameworks. One team doing UI testing using Selenium or whatever. Another team doing some systems integration testing using HP, Quality Center or Qt or whatever it is, right? The point is, all these tools need to provide some feedback so that at the end of the day, someone can make some data-driven decisions around whether a release is viable to go to production or not. That's where a tool like Flow comes in.
So as we look at how this this DevOps tool chain sort of fits together and the different components that encompass it, walk us through this, Sunil, and help us understand specifically how this orchestration takes place.
Sure. So what you're seeing here really is a suite of tools that dev teams use today, right? And they're pushing code, from dev to QA to pre-prod to production. The fact is that there are so many different tools along the way that they become disjointed if you don't have a way to provide the data that comes out of these tools in a single pane of glass view, right? And so you have this pipeline of code going from dev to production. You connect GitHub, you connect Jenkins, you connect Artifactory, you have a suite of test tools. Maybe you're using chat apps, Slack, for example. On the far right side, you might use a tool like ServiceNow for operations management, incident and change management, right? The fact is that all these tools have a certain value. It's like having a toolbox full of tools that are specific, right, for a specific reason. You can't use a hammer to screw a nail in. And so the approach here is that Flow provides you that software delivery mechanism, that software delivery pipeline that standardizes across the entire organization, connects all these tools together to provide you with feedback, collaboration, traceability, auditability. I think you used the term governance, right, across the entire tool chain. And that is what a tool like Flow is capable of, okay?
Yeah, it's a great walkthrough. I think something that would be even more impactful is to be able to give the folks that are attending an opportunity to see this live in action. So with that, I will pass the ball over to you, Sunil, and let you give folks a live tour of how this all works in real time.
Sure, absolutely. All right, I'm assuming you guys can see my screen. So we'll start off with a very high level demo. what I'm going to walk through is the reporting capabilities, and how Flow interacts with some tools, right? And the idea of getting you some visibility in how these tools interact will help you figure out why Flow and its platform, is so crucial to developing a sound ARO scheme for your DevOps transformation. Okay, Flow out of the box comes with the DevOps Insight Server, which is a reporting and dashboards engine. What you're seeing here is a simple release dashboard that shows you total duration of releases, number of releases per month. This is a crucial dashboard for release managers, right? They want to know how many releases we had, in a month. The level of automation is crucial. If you see the top right screen, the level of automation is crucial because I want to know how many releases actually have a significant amount of automation, and the amount of no automation is where we need to improve, right? So a very interesting dashboard, which can be completely customized. You can reduce the amount of data, you can increase the amount of data that is all metadata data that Flow captures in the back end. Tagging is used heavily. Prime example that I usually give is large financial companies that have literally thousands of applications that they develop in-house. And when you're talking about that scale and that level of release cadence, you need a way to be able to filter, right? You don't want to see everything in one single pane. It would be way too busy. So the use of tagging is very prevalent in that case. The second dashboard here shows you total number of deployments, right? Why is this important? Purely first one was for releases, this one's for deployments. Important because a lot of times companies misidentify problems that they see with releases as deployment problems, when in reality, issues that come from mismanagement of releases or not being able to get specific information during a release cycle can lead to problems in deployment, right? And how many times, and I'm sure many of you that are listening, if I asked how many times have you come across a production issue where some change was made to a production server, you didn't find out until you deployed to production, and now production is down, and you've had to spend hours, if not days or weeks, trying to get out of that conundrum, right? So deployment is a critical piece of the puzzle, and knowing which applications had the most deployments or environments with the most deployments, the average duration, is also a crucial piece of information that this again can be customized to fit the need of the organization. DORA is the DevOps Research and Assessment organization that provides key metrics around DevOps. And out of the box, Flow provides some of those key metrics. You can see your mean time to recover on the bottom right. This is a crucial metric because when you deploy to production and something goes down, how long does it actually take you to recover from that and come back live and have a production deployment that's sound and successful, right? It's a key metric. Mean lead time, for example, or change failure rate. You see, oh, we've got so many failures, and sometimes you might hear more about the failures than you heard about the success. And that's true for every walk of life, right? You hear more about the bad things in life than about the good things. But this is all data driven. And so what you see is what you get, right? This gives you the ability to adjust your deployment cycles, your pipeline, to make sure that things are running more efficiently. Now, for a release manager, a pipeline view like this, where I might have multiple pipelines running all at the same time, is a crucial view. The reason I say that in this particular case, this motorcycle front end spring app, as you can see, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pipelines running. You can see one is successful The other ones ran, but they had some issue. The ability for Flow to actually identify the issues within a pipeline and send notifications back to to the developer or to a suite of people that are identified in those notification schemes is crucial, right? So you can provide that level of feedback through logs, through captured information, etc. Once again, when it comes to releases, the idea of dependency management also comes to play. If you have multiple releases, Flow manages dependencies in two ways. One, through an application dependency. So if you had 3 applications of which 2 are dependent on each other, you can set those dependencies so that those 2 applications cannot go to production without the other. Okay. The other layer of dependency management comes at the release layer. So if you have one release with 5 applications and another release with 3 applications, if release A is dependent on release B, none of those 8 applications will go to production unless all 8 have met, your criteria successfully before being pushed to production. So developing a process or your current release process is a very easy thing in Flow. It's this typical Kanban view that you see in a lot of products these days. But the beauty of this really is that you can set entry and exit criteria for each phase. The process runs left to right, top to bottom, and you can model this to your existing business processes or your release processes. In this particular case, this process is taking input from a potential check-in into GitHub or Git, and it pulls Jira tickets. So that's one integration to Jira. That pulls that code to build it, and we use Jenkins in this case to build the application. We then deploy it to development using the existing deployment model in Flow. And then we run SonarQube, right? This is really the whole idea around DevSecOps, where you need to run your security checks, and they could be a manual step in between this if necessary, but we've automated it because we have an integration to SonarQube. You could have integrations to HP Fortify to do vulnerability testing, for example, right? Unit tests are then run, and then we update the Jira tickets. Typically, this update to tickets could be a manual process, right? And it usually is, because if you don't have any automation behind it, somebody has to go in and say, these 3 tickets that started this, build cycle for this particular application are now built and ready to be deployed to QA, but I need to go back and change the status of those tickets to deploy to QA, for example, right? And so it becomes a manual process. In Flow, we've automated it. And so as we walk through, there's a few key things I want to point out. Here's in the pre-prod phase, we have a Slack notification. This enables what we call chat ops, right? Chat ops is one of those things where to reduce the amount of chatter on email. Slack, for example, you can do status queries on releases, execute stuff on Flow if necessary. But this allows the interaction through Slack to flow. We then create a ServiceNow ticket. I'll demonstrate this briefly. What this does is basically say, if I'm in ops, I don't really need to look at Flow. My whole interaction for the entire day is through ServiceNow. And so when I get a message or a notification in ServiceNow that a ticket was open, I can go in, take a look at it, make sure everything is kosher. And if I approve it, Flow then takes care of moving the release on to the next stage, which in this case is production. So what I'll do is I'll stop here. I'm going to go ahead and kick off this release. And as we let it run, you will see a bar at the top running to show you the progress of this particular release. It is now in the process of pulling tickets from Jira in this first task, pulling the code from Git, and then building it using Jenkins. We have an extremely tight integration with Jenkins today. We have extremely tight integrations with other tools that are all listed on our plugins page. And we actually have 2 levels of integration. One is a supported integration under which tools like Jenkins and of course SonarQube and ServiceNow all fall under. We have another community-based integration site where you can pull integrations that somebody may have worked on and are freely available as well, and you're free to modify those since they're community. So you can see this release is running right now. Top bar here shows blue, and we're in the process of running SonarQube. It just finished that. It ran some unit tests, and it updated the Jira tickets. Now, the minute it does that, it'll push over to QA because that in itself was a successful cycle. All right, and there it goes to QA. We have surfaced all that information up to the dev site, to the dev phase, and you can see over here I have a report of all the Jira tickets, and these are hyperlinks back to Jira. Another cool report is from SonarQube, which is easily accessible, hyperlinked. You can see this coverage is 0%. Now, in this particular case, because it's a demo, we're moving forward. But if I really wanted to nitpick this, I could go back to my SonarQube job details and look at the parameters. In this particular case, if I said that I wanted my Sonar metrics reliability to say all, and if a developer decided that they wanted to change that to none, I can query on this particular parameter because we have, again, a tight integration with SonarQube. And we pull in all these parameters so you can query on them by default. And if something was set to none here, we could fail this release and push the information back to the developer. This is closing the loop, okay? As you can see here in pre-prod, we're now at what we call the entry gate into pre-prod. This requires a manual approval. And I, as Raj, the release manager, need to approve this. This is great for manual approvals, notifications to teams or people, or to get feedback via email as well, which is one of the key features in Flow. I'm going to approve this as we move forward. And you'll see as soon as I approve it, I go into the pre-prod stage, deploy to pre-production. I'll run some integration tests and send out a Slack notification message. I think the key factor here is that since this is pre-prod, somebody in operations may want to verify that, hey, we are, QA has been done and we verify that we have the results, right? At this point, I can now create a ServiceNow ticket. Now you can see I just created one ticket here. If I click on the summary, it shows me my link to ServiceNow. And as you can see, I'm now going to ServiceNow. Now, Mr. Operations, who just deals with ServiceNow, gets a notification, sees that this ticket is in a requested state. If I have information that Flow is feeding into this ticket, and this is the stuff that he or she may be looking for, then I can approve this. And the minute I approve it and update, I can go back to my pipeline run, and it'll automatically kick off into the production stage, and there it goes. So as you see, we are now running through the production stage deployments, and all done until it gets to test, where we see a small issue with this, right? You can actually take a look and see what the details are. Currently, there are no records to display. We actually had an issue with a missing parameter. So this shows you that there's some feedback here going on, right? It says that production is not complete. However, if I go back to my summary, I can go back to that application and take a look. Let me see if I can find you a pipeline that was successful. Give me 1 second. Releases, think release, and there we go. Pipeline runs. Nope, not it. Sorry about that. And there's a successful one. This one was complete, and you can see that I have a suite of approval reports that got generated out of that. There's an approval audit report, which shows you who did what, where, when. This is important when it comes to traceability, auditability, governance, right? At the end of the day, an auditor wants to know who approved what to go to production, because if something does go wrong in production, then we know who to find, right? Production audits, what version of application was deployed where and by whom, right? This one in point shows you the microservices that were deployed, their registry values, the versions of those images, right? Important stuff. A evidence link. This one at the end of the day is really all those reports that get generated. We went through the code quality report. We went through the ServiceNow ticket report, and we saw a little bit of the Jira report that came out, right? So all these are evidence that comes out of a release. At the end of the day, you want to see what's going on across your entire pipeline, your software delivery pipeline. One additional thing that I want to show you is what we call the release calendar. This is an important aspect of large organizations that have blackout periods that affect their deployment schedules, right? And you can actually black out environments or infrastructure from deployment activity. And what ends up happening is that, as you can see, all these releases, at some point, if they get to, let's just say, the 25th of July, they'll pool at that point, and until we get past the 28th, you won't see any activity, essentially. So what does this do for those people that work in operations? This is great because they know there's not going to be any activity around deployments, to their infrastructure or their environments. One last feature here that I want to really hit on is called the SelfService Catalog. The SelfService Catalog is an entry, is a single-click entry point for the users, and we can have multiple types of users in Flow. We call them personas, right? You have the end user. These might be developers who just need to run maybe their release, or maybe they want to create a release from a template. And I'll call this one Gabe's release, right? Assuming you have some templates set up to do different things. In this case, we have a multi-stage release template. There's a blue-green deployment type release template. Might have a patch or a feature release template. A multitude of things. You can even have database templates, right? Or anything to do with middle tier systems, which might follow a different path. In this case, we'll just stick with the multi-stage. If I click OK, this will go out and create me a pipeline from that template. The minute we get done with that, I'll go back to the pipelines, or to the releases actually, and you should see Gabe's release created. Simple as that. Okay, so the service catalog is really an entry point where you can automate a lot of your infrastructure asks as well. The request to create a machine, the request to get access to maybe a Kubernetes cluster, right? The request to create an AWS infrastructure, whatever it may be, you can automate that. And this is a great entry point for people that are outside the scope of even releases. Everyday users that need specific asks from your IT organization. I will stop at this point because there's a lot of other features that I know people are probably itching, but we're at a point where I think we could probably take some questions, if possible, and talk a little bit more about Flow. Are there any questions?
I have a few here, and just so everyone knows, you can continue to ask as we go. So if you think of something while we're asking these, please go right ahead, put it right into the question panel. So to take this, how do you deal with multiple teams, approvals, and multi-stage releases?
So multi-stage releases, for example, what you see on the screen is a single stage release. It's a multi-stage release, but it's for a single pipeline. Our ability to stitch different pipelines is part of this, is part of Flow. So in essence, if the development aspect of this pipeline was a separate template, for example, I can say that if in some iterative form in development, we have an application that keeps running. Did we lose my screen, Max? Do you know?
Sorry about that, bringing that right back to you.
That's all right. I was just trying to demonstrate that one screen, and then we can, yeah. So this dev stage that you see on the far left could be a separate pipeline, and then we stitch that into a separate pipeline for QA, pre-prod, and prod. Okay, so that's one way to do that. Another way to do that, to do multi-stage pipelines, of course, is through the release dependencies that I talked about earlier. Okay.
All right, let's go on to another one here. Do you integrate with cloud platforms like AWS and Azure?
Yes. So out of the box, Flow has very tight integrations with AWS, Azure, GCP. We even have integrations with Terraform, OpenShift, PCF, Pivotal Cloud Foundry, or Cloud Foundry in general. A lot of companies today have a hybrid approach, to moving to the cloud. In other words, their internal infrastructure has its own inbuilt cloud, could be using OpenShift and maybe Cloud Foundry, for example. And then they might have greenfield applications that they're developing, maybe microservice apps that they want to push to AWS and Azure. And so some of these deployment tasks that you see could potentially be one to AWS and one to your local infrastructure. And so, yes, we do have very tight integrations with AWS, Azure, GCP, and even those platforms that allow enterprises to create an internal cloud infrastructure.
All right, looks like maybe one more for now. How do you manage dependencies?
We touched on dependencies earlier, right? There were two types of dependencies. One is the release level dependency, where you can tie one release to another, right? So in other words, if you recall, if release A has 3 or 4 applications and release B has 10 applications, you might have a dependency from an application in release A to a dependency to an application in release B. And so now you have application dependency and release dependency, and those can be tied together in Flow. So, basically release A can't go to production without release B. And we know that application A in release A is tied to application A in release B. And so those two applications can't go to production either, right? So everything is tied together in a nice, clean fashion. Release managers can manage that, and they get to see where each release sits and the applications underneath that. That way they can monitor activity as things go along in that pipeline run view.
All right. Oh, one more just came in. How does Flow address compliance requirements?
So this particular, as you see, the audit report on this far left, far right side of the screen is kind of there to give you an idea of the amount of compliance, governance, traceability and audit that we can provide out of the box. Again, these are all reports that can be customized. Out of the box, we provide these, but as you can see, compliance comes in many different forms. Auditors have different functions across the organization, right? Some want to find out what was deployed where and when and by whom. Others want to know at a very high level, something like who did the approval, right? This might be the business layer. So we try to address the business and the technical layer with different types of reports, both of which can be completely customizable. Okay.
All right. Let's some more coming in. So let's just try another one here. If
Sure.
I'm migrating to the cloud, how would I leverage Flow for this?
Good question. So when you start looking at your application portfolio, there is no single company out there that I know. Well, let's put it this way. If you're just developing one application, it doesn't really matter, right? But most companies develop more than 10, 15, 20, 100, 200 applications. And so there's always a certain aspect of that application portfolio that's moving or migrating to the cloud. The ability for Flow to let you point and shoot. In other words, I could have deployment to AWS, deployment to Azure, and deployment to my local infrastructure, all for the same application, because one, we use deployment models. Two, our tight integrations with all these different platforms allow you to do this. And three, really, it's our ability to parameterize applications, from the get-go, that allow you to say, if my application is a Java app that's a microservice, then go to Azure or go to AWS. But if it's a legacy application, then go to my local infrastructure, and all through Flow, all set up through Flow and its backend processing.
We might be about the end of questions for right now. I'm going to pass this back over to Gabe. Sunil, anything you want to say while we're moving the presenter back over?
No, I think I want to hit the idea of software delivery management platform that Jim started off with, which is a crucial piece, right, of ARO. Flow enables ARO, but more importantly, it enables your software delivery pipeline and provides you the infrastructure to create a very solid software delivery management platform, right? We all talk about pushing code and getting that time to market shrunk. It is absolutely essential that companies start realizing that application release orchestration should be part and parcel of their strategy, their DevOps transformation, their digital transformation strategy.
Excellent. So as we are getting close to the top of the hour here, I also wanted to help point out the fact that for folks that are on the call, as well as folks that are listening in on demand, as a special thank you, we wanted to be able to provide a free ebook to everyone. And this really breaks down a little bit more information as you are thinking about release orchestration, as you're introducing that into your different your different teams, and being able to figure out a way to help streamline all of that to take out the whole anxiety piece behind software releases. So I'll also include this into the chat as well for folks. But this link you can copy, and you can screenshot this if you're watching live now too, and you can visit this and be able to download your free ebook, which is going to help provide a little bit more information on what we shared today on that. Oh, looks like the link is available now. Perfect. So you can just click on that, you can download the ebook, and you are all set with that. With that, I wanted to thank everyone that attended. I want to thank everyone on the call today. Again, folks listening on demand as well. I want to thank Sunil, Jim, and everyone for being able to come on and provide some information for our listeners here. And I want to just say, if you need any more information, visit the CloudBees website and take a look at Flow for demo purposes, for anything that you want to be able to take a complete tour of.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. That survey is going to be popping up. If you just take a moment to answer, let us know what you thought and what you'd like to learn more about. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone for presenting, and thanks to everyone for watching. We'll talk to you again real soon.